Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Matt Taglia, Senior Director of Emerson College Polling. Matt, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We are in a different spot for sure from when the last time you and I spoke. We are sitting here about 2 weeks after the first historic presidential election between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden. And Emerson College has a new poll taken after the debate showing Trump leading Biden in a head-to-head matchup. So what are your takeaways from this poll?
Well, my takeaway is mainly that there's been some slight movement away from Biden, but that hasn't necessarily benefited Trump in this case. So we have consistently seen that Trump hits sort of a wall at around 46, 47%. Now, that said, President Biden hasn't surpassed about 45% in polling this year. But we now see Trump winning independent voters initially. However, after we make undecided voters choose between the top two candidates, we see that they're split. So it's a bit of a mixed picture here. I think that this could be much worse for the Biden campaign, given the debate performance, given the media attention that's followed that. So if I'm the Biden campaign, I'm actually pretty happy with these results because at the end of the day, after we have pushed all those undecided voters, we see a split race, 50-50 between Biden and Trump. And that's what it was in June in our pre-debate polling.
So in a sense, how much did this debate and the fallout thereafter really matter when it comes to voters? Because when it comes to pundits, when it comes to Democrats, there's a lot of what's reported as panic on the Hill in different communities. But is that really seen when it comes to voters?
Yeah, we really aren't seeing that yet, at least not at the national level. So, again, we see a little bit of movement from the previous June polling. We see a little bit of defection away from Biden, but it's not so much as you might expect given the media attention over the debate performance. But that's not distributed equally, right? So, President Biden might be holding his own right now in the national vote, but that isn't necessarily true in some of these swing states. And so we've seen some polling come out from those states, and in some cases, President Biden has lost some ground there. So, I think the national picture looks pretty similar to what we saw prior to the debate, a little bit of ground loss. But again, this isn't distributed evenly. And, some of these states are a little bit less important when it comes to the Electoral College.
When you're saying that there's a bit of a defection from Biden and it's not completely contributed to the debate, what is it attributed to? Is it because of different issues? Is it because of a more fondness to Donald Trump? What does that look like?
Well, and I think that the debate certainly influenced some of that defection. There's nothing necessarily tangible that we can see in the top lines. But we know that folks are concerned about the economy. That's been a consistent issue for voters of both parties. Folks are concerned about immigration. That has been the second top concern for voters, more or less throughout the year. So I think that the debate performance certainly influenced this, move away from Biden, not necessarily towards Trump, but folks saying, hey, let's see what happens. I'm not necessarily willing to commit to voting for President Biden. And these issues, they certainly aren't necessarily helping the president right now.
And this poll ran other prominent Democrats against Trump to see where they landed in a head-to-head matchup. What are some of your takeaways there?
Well, I think the major takeaway is that no other candidate currently is able to match President Biden's vote share against former President Trump. So the closest that any of these hypothetical Democratic candidates get is Vice President Kamala Harris. But even then, she's 6 points away from Donald Trump in those top lines. We see that further down as well. So Governor Newsom, he trails Trump by 8 points. Governor Shapiro also trails by 8 points. And then Governor Whitmer, whose name has been floated as well, she trails by 10 points. So, I think that at least on the face of it, right now, if folks are going to the polls and they were voting on one of these candidates, then President Trump would be at an extreme advantage against these candidates. However, these candidates have not necessarily benefited from the same media coverage, from the fact that they are a sitting president, or from any of the ad spending that the Biden campaign and President Biden himself enjoys right now. So that's all to say, some of the support might be muted. If something were to change, if one of these candidates did in fact become the Democratic nominee for president, I think that this would tighten some. And I think that there's probably more upside to certain candidates than there are others. And we can see that in this poll.
But if you're the Biden campaign or President Biden himself, you're looking at these numbers and saying, hey, Democrats, listen, I know you're upset right now. You want us to win the White House, but I'm your best option compared to every other prominent Democrat, past and present, that has been mentioned so far and floated as a possible replacement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think just taking the poll at face value and looking at just those top line numbers, yes, you can. The Biden campaign could use this as a tool to say, hey, I'm your guy. But when you consider some of these other candidates who don't have the same name exposure, who aren't necessarily known outside of their state or region, and you start to look at some of that undecided vote. So Governor Shapiro, for instance, he has the highest undecided vote of all of these candidates. But that's a vote that isn't going to Donald Trump. So, the same cannot be said for candidates in this poll like former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Folks know who she is, by and large. There are new voters out there who don't necessarily have a formed opinion of her, but she obviously moves some folks towards the Trump camp. But that can't be said for some of these other more blank slate candidates, if we want to call them that. So, yeah, I think that is one way to spin the results, and the Biden campaign would be correct in reporting it that way, I suppose. But there are other ways to report this as well.
I want to talk about the motivations behind voters, because we've reported on the past, many voters aren't that enthusiastic about a 2020 rematch now in 2024 with older candidates, and we've seen their presidencies play out. Based on your polling here, who is the most motivated demographic? What are you seeing when it comes to those numbers?
Well, the most motivated voters are more or less in Trump camp or Republicans. That's what we're seeing. We're consistently seeing that younger voters, minority voters, and Democrats generally are less motivated to vote. I think it's about 65% among Democrats versus nearly 80% for Republicans. So that's a bit of a tough pill for Democrats and the Biden campaign to swallow. It's going to be tough, frankly, to bring that number up without something in the race substantially changing, especially on the Democratic side. Folks know who President Trump is, especially Democrats. If they're going to rally that base, then something needs to change.
It's no secret that it's been a bad 2 weeks for President Biden. He's been flooded with questions about his mental fitness, his mental acuity. Can he serve for 4 more years? And but there is a little bit of good news, a glimmer of hope for him in your polling. You found that his job approval rating increased by 2% over the past month, from 37% to 39%. Is there any indication of why that is?
That's right. It did increase. I would, caveat that with that it's a slight increase, but an increase nonetheless. And we see that that's coming mostly from voters over the age of 60, from Black voters and minority voters overall, as well as independents. So those are three groups that are certainly must-wins for the Biden campaign. I think that he should be happy with that. But that said, a majority still disapprove. Roughly 18% of Democrats even disapprove of President Biden's job performance. So, again, it's not necessarily the best news, but it's not the worst news. And I think some of this could come down to the fact that, folks did watch the debate between President Biden and former President Trump. And I think maybe some of them liked what President Biden has done or what he stands for, but at the same time don't necessarily want to commit to voting for him right now. So while they may have increased in approval after hearing about some of the things that he's done, things that he wants to do, they aren't necessarily committing to voting for him.
A slight uptick's good, but 39% isn't that high. So right now he's sitting here less than 4 months away from November, from Election Day. He's the incumbent facing increasingly bad news. Historically, it's 39% right now where he's sitting running for re-election. Is that good news for a president?
No, that's not good news. We can see that his overall vote share is higher than that. So it's not as if, one is going to predict the other, but we do see historically that severely unpopular presidents like President Biden don't tend to win elections. So, I would be, as the Biden campaign, working to do everything I can to get that approval number up. It is an indicator of several of how he might expect the vote to turn out on Election Day. And, frankly, I don't see how he will necessarily capture enough of the vote share to win on Election Day without roughly 40% approval.
Obviously, the debate really shook up the race and continues to do so. There's still a lot of unanswered questions. I mean, President Biden saying he answered them. It appears that Democrats don't like the answer that he's giving. So as a pollster, what are you looking for between now and Election Day?
Well, as a pollster, I'm going to be looking for changes among key demographics. For the Democrats especially, that's going to be minority voters. I'm going to be looking at that enthusiasm number as well, because they frankly need to get those numbers up, especially among minority voters, especially among voters under roughly the age of 40. And that's going to be tough. That is really a tough hill to climb. Taking the pollster hat off for a second, I'm also going to be looking at the party politics, what happens at the conventions. That's going to influence how we poll this race. That's going to influence almost immediately what that top line number is. So there's a lot at play here. This is probably one of the most dramatic election cycles I've seen just in the past 2 weeks. So, there are key constituencies out there. A lot of them are really not excited about the election, and something probably will happen. Whether or not that makes a significant difference with those groups remains to be seen.
We have really seen a dramatic shift from what seemed to be a sleepy primary season to this really now chaotic general. Do you think anything's missing when it comes to these numbers in the national conversation when it comes to the presidential race?
Well, I think that by and large, at least prior to the past 2 weeks, the media and the campaign's been focusing on the things that do matter to folks. So the economy, that's number one. I think we saw from this poll that people are concerned about U.S. foreign policy right now. Overall, they think, voters believe that we had a better foreign policy 4 years ago under former President Trump than we do now. So we will eventually have to turn back the issues and away from the drama. So, I think that that's probably missing right now. The campaigns have been pretty good about sticking to, ensuring that they're talking about those top issues. Both campaigns, frankly, talking about the economy, inflation, jobs, and to some degree, immigration, foreign policy. So again, yeah, they need to talk about those. We need to get over the drama humps first, and then they can get back to those issues, I think. And this might be an opportunity with President Biden and the conclusion of the NATO summit.
Matt Taglia, I appreciate you coming back on, and I hope you continue to do so as Emerson releases more polls. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.